To read Back to Reality, the best-selling novel of the Bestseller Experiment by the two Marks, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/Back to Reality.
And subscribe to this podcast to get loads of extra bonuses. Go to bestsellerexperiment.com/subscribe.
Welcome to the show, John Yorke. How are you today?
I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Our absolute pleasure. Now,
I'm just going to take over, Mark. Well, just you calm down a little bit because you're physically shaking there. No, but I think we should tell for people who've not maybe tuning in for the first time in this podcast, John's a bit of, as they say in playgrounds around schools in England, apparently a bit of a ledge, because going back to one of our, I think it was our second episode, Mark. Well, I should tell you this, John. We had a lady from Hachette talk to us about your book, and that's when I first discovered it, actually. And since then, it just keeps coming up. I think it's probably the most referenced book in the podcast. So congratulations first on writing such a great book. When did you decide to write it?
Oh, well, to cut a long story short, I was teaching writing. I created this course at the BBC to teach new writers, and I didn't know what I was doing because it had always been an instinctive process to me. And so I thought I need to know about this. So I read all the classic screenwriting books. And the more I read, the more I thought, there's something not right here. There's something missing. And the missing was, as Mark said, was the why. You know, so you would get, there has to be an inciting incident on page 23, but no one would ever say why. And to me, you know, I come from an academic background, and so you can't write that. You know, if you submitted that as a university thesis, you'd be told to source it, you'd be told to prove it, and none of these books ever proved it. So it felt to me, oh, this is really interesting. And so I didn't know why. So then, of course, I had to kind of posit loads of theories and try things out until you kind of stumble on something that seems like it might be the truth. And really, writing that down was my attempt to find out the answer to that question.
And how did you get into storytelling yourself? Did this happen at a very young age?
My father made amateur films, and I was the clapper boy in his movies at a very young age. So it was always around me, and he read a lot, so novels were always around me. But it was really, as a teenager, this is going to date me now, an advert appeared in a British newspaper saying photo love stories, story writers wanted, will pay £50 a story. And, you know, I was a student. I thought, that sounds great to me. And so I wrote a photo love story, and I sent it to the publishers in Scotland, and they said, this is great, can you write another one? And so that's how I started writing stories.
And how did you make the leap into television? How did you break through there?
I got a job as a sound engineer in the BBC, because it was that thing of you get in any way you can and then just network, just to have a look around, watch everything. So I had this amazing 3-year apprenticeship where I used to run from watching sitcoms being made in TV studios to watching the news being broadcast on Radio 4 and just learning all the time, and then thinking I want to do drama. And then it's just a question of knocking on doors till someone finally says, okay, we'll give you a chance. So I did radio drama first of all, did 2 or 3 years of that, and then finally got into EastEnders, which is the big British long-running soap opera here. And within 6 months of being there, it was kind of, oh, this is interesting. Yeah, I think I know how to do this. I was so scared, because it's a huge show. At that time, it was getting 20 million viewers every week. So it was really terrifying. But then I suddenly thought, oh, no, actually, this is interesting. I feel comfortable. And then the storyliner left, and the boss said to me, we're a bit stuffed now. We haven't got anybody. Do you want to write the next month's worth of storylines? And I took a deep breath. I said, yes.
Oh, my God.
It was really scary, because I had no idea what I was doing at all. I immediately went out and bought 80 cigarettes and smoked them all immediately. I don't smoke anymore, just to make that very clear. But you do it, and you just, there was no choice. You have to do it. It's a bit like your thing. You've got to do it.
It's brilliant. It's so often, and we've talked to such incredible guests as well. This seems to be coming up, right time, right place, but you've got to put yourself in that place of opportunity to begin with.
Yeah, that's right. And it was brilliant. I storylined EastEnders single-handed for 1.5 years.
Wow.
And It was the best apprenticeship in the world. It just teaches you everything about story. All the basic techniques are in soap opera. It's not any different. It's slightly bigger. It's slightly more heightened. But in a way, that's a really good way to learn. You know,
What were the sort of key storylines during your period on EastEnders?
it was a long time ago. It was actually 1990s when I was storylining. It was the Mitchell brothers' big love triangle, Sharongate, as it was known, and the death of Arthur Fowler on trumped-up charges, and a few other things like that. It feels like a long introduction of Tiffany, who became a big star at the time. I think it seems like a very long time ago.
Now, the death of Arthur Fowler. I mean, this won't mean anything to our American listeners, but this is like Who Shot JR, basically, isn't it? He was a beloved character. Who makes the decision? Does the actor say to you, you know what, I'm getting a bit fed up with this, I need to move on? Or do you sit there like some evil emperor going, right, I'm going to kill you off, son?
In that case, it was the actor. The actor decided they'd been in it since the beginning. They were getting on a bit and thought, now's the time to go, which is very sad because we all loved him and he was a great character. But, you know, departures give you good stories, you know, and sometimes you know, you just decide to kill people. And sometimes that's because they've really upset you. And sometimes it's because they're not working, and sometimes you really don't want to, but it's a really good story. Right. You know, and what it taught me there was actually nobody is indispensable. If you've just got to be really good about how you replace them. But if you replace them correctly, then the show always feels fresh. Yeah. And it was a really good lesson. You know, like, you know, you don't stick with what you know that works. Keep reinventing for the future. Right. So it was a good place to learn.
Now, if you pick up my paperback copy of your book and you dropped it from about 3 foot, it would open on a page that I turn to very often, which has a thing called the roadmap of change. Now, many of our listeners will be familiar with the hero's journey. You know, it's kind of storytelling 101, really. Yeah. But it was the roadmap of change is the thing I return to again and again and again. And when we started outlining our novel, Mr. Desvaux and I, it's the first thing we put in Scrivener was I put all the beats for the roadmap of change. How did that come about, that wonderful invention?
It emerged slowly. What was obvious from the beginning of doing this was that stories seemed to have a common pattern, but that common pattern was defined as 3 acts. And you know, that's useful to a certain extent, but it seemed to be there was something else going on. You know, writers normally, you know, the tricky thing for most writers is Act 2. It's the middle thing. What happens in Act 2 is where people get lost all the time. And the more I started to look at it, I thought there's something. I hadn't quite worked out the significance of the midpoint when I was doing that, but I was just plugging away thinking, I know there's something here. And then in Christopher Vogler's book, The Writer's Journey, obviously he talks about Joseph Campbell, and you know, we used to call it slightly rudely Campbell for Dummies was The Writer's Journey. But, you know, it's even helpful. And he started off drawing the roadmap of change, but he only did the first little bit of it. Mm-hmm. And I looked at it, I thought, there's more there. Right. Why have you stopped there? So I do credit it in the book, and I make it clear that it came from an original observation of him. But what he didn't get, or McKee didn't get, or Sid Field didn't really get, was the essentially symmetrical nature of structure. And once I'd worked out that actually the middle was so profoundly important, then the roadmap, you know, the journey to the center of the forest where you find the truth and then taking that truth back home, that was the eureka moment. And so a lot of people help, but the writer's journey was a really useful clue. And then you just sort of piece it together from there, and then you test it with everything you can find. Just say, because when you're doing all this stuff, you're really prone to confirmation bias all the time. You know, go, yes, of course that's right because it fits this. You know, and you have to be really ruthless. And my test with all of this was, does Shakespeare do it? Right. And the great thing about Shakespeare is he writes very archetypally, and you know for certain never read Sid Field.
Okay. Now you break a story into 5 acts now, instead of what many consider to be the usual 3. So are you okay if I go through this sort of?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because it's in the book, and like I say, I return to it again and again. So we have Act 1, which is broken into 3 beats. There's no knowledge, growing knowledge, awakening. Act 2 which is doubt, overcoming reluctance, then acceptance. Then we have Act 3, experimenting with knowledge, and then you got in big capital letters, midpoint key knowledge, and then experimenting post-knowledge. Act 4, doubt, again, you're talking about the symmetry, growing reluctance, regression. Then Act 5, reawakening, reacceptance, total mastery. And you have a little graphic in the book of that as well. When would you advise writers to apply that? Would you advise them to do as we've done, to sort of use it as a sketch for an outline? Or is it something that maybe if you just put your story down on paper and then look at this and say, does my story fit this? What do you find works best?
It's a very good question. Every writer's different. So there's a couple of things. What was interesting about this is I'm not saying people should write in 5 acts. Yeah. What was interesting for me was Paul Greengrass, actually, if you give the Paul name dropping, but he was the person who said it, and I couldn't answer. He said, "Why did Shakespeare write in 5 acts?" And I didn't know. And you explore it, and then it reveals a pattern, and then you think that pattern is best articulated using 5 acts. But Shakespeare wrote in 5 acts because of the theatrical needs of his consumers, so you don't have to write in 5 acts. So 5 acts just became a tool on the journey to discovering the essential shape. So that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer is most great writers would say they write with their heart first. They pour their heart onto the page. They don't structure beforehand. Then they go back and then they start to use the tools of their craft and chisel away. Jimmy McGovern, the great British writer, used to say, I write my first draft with my heart. I write my second draft with my head, and you chisel away at the marble. And the story then reveals itself, writing is rewriting, etc., etc. But I know a lot of writers who are very methodical and they use 5-act structure. Say you're writing an hour's drama on a television, say, okay, 4 commercial breaks. And at the end of turning points at the end of Act 1, turning points at the end of Act 2, etc., etc. And they work out those big they've got a vague idea of the story in their head, then they work out the turning point, and then they write to fit that. And I think it's just the personality type that assumes itself. What's really interesting about this is people like Jimmy eschew structure, and people like Russell T Davies, who did Doctor Who, etc. They don't like talking about structure. They don't really believe in it. They just write it. And if you read their work, they write perfect structure. And in a sense, that's the greatest proof of all, is it comes from within. It's the way we organize the world. And that's all you read to know, really. And the rest is, how geeky do you want to be? And how much of a help is being a geek.
And you say this is how we make sense of the world. Does this tap into the why we tell stories? What do you think of the purpose of stories, and have we always told them in the same way?
This was the really big question. Where does it come from? And if you look at the roadmap of change, you go from no knowledge halfway through to key knowledge, and then back to mastery of that knowledge. And that's really the clue to it, because where it comes from in the end is, cut a long story short, structure is the dramatization of the process of knowledge assimilation. It's the dramatization of the process in which we learn. So I exist, I talk to you, I change.
Sorry about that.
Happens all the time
or
to me,
vice versa. You talk to me, you change. I mean, you can't not have that interaction with every single thing in the world. Child touches fire, ouch, learns not to touch fire again. That's structure. So really, it's that's all it is. It's the process of knowledge assimilation. That's where structure comes from. And it's really as simple as that, really.
That's fascinating, because in some ways, I've had some very deep, often quite spiritual discussions about the hero's journey as a structure. And a lot of people reflect that then on our own lives and say, in some ways we are kind of in the hero's journey ourselves throughout our own life. And when you talk about this idea of learning, that completely connected for me, because it really makes sense in some ways that each day we are living out our own story, in essence, kind of writing a chapter in our own book.
The way to look at it is the hero's journey is just a metaphor for knowledge assimilation. It's a very hippie-esque, Grateful Dead-ish way of expressing, we learn and we change. And the hero's journey is a really good articulation of that. But it's a metaphor. Like all these story paradigms, like John Truby's 22 steps of story structure, they're just metaphors for this shape. And every person who writes a screenwriting book is really just writing, they're trying to articulate the same shape we all are. You just find the best metaphor to do it. I chose woods because obviously it's the fairy tale structure. It's the same thing.
Can I just say, John, as well, I had a chuckle to myself earlier because I thought Into the Woods, and you could have ended the title of the book and Down the Rabbit Hole. But as we start to explore this idea of storytelling, on one level, it can be really stripped down and simplified as you're explaining it. And on the other, we can get so lost, especially when we're 70,000 words into a book.
Yeah.
With a deadline, which is great. But it's this idea that there is a bit of a rabbit warren underneath the woods, isn't there, in some ways? And if you go too far down there, that can almost be detrimental and you can't find your way back out sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's finding structure is hard. Certainly the first few times you do it. I think like riding a bike, it becomes instinctive over time. You have to learn to listen to yourself and listen to your heart and let it tell you, no, I need to go over here. And actually what was really interesting, again, when I started teaching about 15 years ago, I taught my first generation of writers. I didn't even talk about the midpoint at all because I didn't understand it at that point. So I was teaching really basic stuff. Of all the people I've taught, they're far the most successful group I've ever taught because, they find it. It's great to have, but you can put too much emphasis on, if this stuff becomes a crutch to prop you up, then it stops that extraordinary thing that happens when you look at the world and think, I want to write the world down.
Well, this brings me on to something that, you talk about fractals and story shape and these kind of patterns repeating themselves. And it does make me think there is a danger, and I've been guilty of this in the past, which is where you try and shoehorn characters into a story shape and then you end up making them do things because, well, they're supposed to have a revelation in the middle. They're supposed to cross the threshold at this point. This must be something you see again and again. How do you avoid something like that?
I think you've got to be prepared to throw all this stuff away.
Right.
In the end, the great writers are the writers whose imagination triumphs. The imagination leads the way. It's then propped up with a skeleton. But what's interesting is often when you're writing, what you think is the midpoint isn't the midpoint. And what you think is the third act break actually isn't the third act break. But if you try and force it to be, then you get in trouble. What you should do is just go, no, I'll just write it. I made a film a few years ago, which has now been turned into a series on the BBC. And I was convinced the midpoint was this thing. And it was only a year later when I watched it again, so like, oh my God, no, it's not that at all, it's that. But it didn't really matter because the audience aren't going there, well, there's the midpoint. If they are, then you're in trouble. So
it's nice to know you're as prone to this as the rest of us. When developing a character, the thing we've been hearing again and again and again is character really needs to come first. What's the best way to start building a character? You talk about things like ego versus id. Is that always a good place to start?
Well, I don't think there's one way to start. I think, there's loads of tricks you can use. The one which I learnt on EastEnders, but right at the very beginning, was can you draw them as a cartoon?
Right.
And that was brilliant because immediately, what are you going to exaggerate? And then you suddenly realize, well, this is Dickens. This is what Dickens does. He takes one aspect and he exaggerates it, and you get real clarity straight away. And so if you look at all the great EastEnders characters, I'm sorry if you're an American, this will mean nothing to you whatsoever. They're really distinctive types.
Yeah.
They're exaggerations of one thing. Now, if they're just that, they'll be two-dimensional. But once you're there, you can then flesh them out. And so that was a really useful lesson. The ego and the id thing is really, it's something that a writer said to me years ago. They said, all great characters are contradictions. They're in conflict with themselves the whole time. And he talks about Basil Fawlty, seeing himself as this, lord of the manor, kind of like a man of high class and breeding, and which is obviously absurd because he was nothing but he was a bed and breakfast owner in a hotel in Torquay. And the conflict between that, same with Captain Mannering in Dad's Army. I am the great officer, but of course he's utterly inept and everybody laughs at him. Is that conflict is what fuels a character, between who a character thinks they are and who they really are, is at the root of all storytelling. The Godfather's a really great illustration of this. He thinks he's a war hero, but he's much, much darker than that, and he goes on a journey in which he learns that actually he's not a war hero at all. He's something much darker than that. And of course, the significant point where he shoots the policeman and the gangster is the midpoint of the film. That's the lesson. This is who I am. And you see that conflict in his eyes.
Yeah.
And it's bang.
Yeah. It's funny, I was listening to, I think it was Diane Keaton being interviewed the other night, and she said when they started shooting The Godfather, the producers wanted to fire Al Pacino because the stuff they shot first was the wedding and those early scenes where he's kind of sitting there and everyone else is doing all the action, and the producer, we've got to fire this kid, he's not doing anything. So Coppola shifted the shooting schedule around to have that scene with the cop and where he comes out the toilet and shoots him. And then they were like, oh, okay, yeah, we get it. It's amazing. Oh, it's incredible. I love that film.
So beautifully directed. Every act.
So, John, one of the things that we're obviously focusing on, which we've drawn an analogy with your work, is looking at this idea of a bestseller. I mean, a lot of people look at it and think, oh, it's just a trite kind of idea. But in some ways, you've worked on bestsellers in TV. And I'm curious to know, what analogies have you drawn when you're reading a really good book? What analogies do you draw about the structure of, say, an episode of EastEnders and a good chapter in a book?
The thing that you always take with you is you've just got to make sure that every sentence makes you want to read the next sentence. Every word wants to make you read the next word. And largely, Lee Child does this brilliantly. The Jack Reacher novels are really good illustrations of big populist storytelling. And he said it, he said, like, you ask a question and then you don't answer it. Oh, that's and that's all you're doing. But Ian Foster said exactly the same thing. The only important thing in a story is what happens next. And conversely, the only thing that will ruin a story is if you don't care what happens next. So it's all about, all the techniques you use to create curiosity and intrigue and defer gratification. And the more you do that, the more populist the novel or the story seems to be. So that's partly, that's just, good standard technique, and that applies to the literary novel as much as the potboiler. But the other thing you look for in a story is, do enough people want to be that character? Where do you place your heart? Is the key thing I ask in every script I ever develop. Is like, who do I love? Who's my hero? And do I want to be them? And if you don't, then no one else is going to want to be them either. So, but do you want to be Al Pacino in The Godfather? Oh, God, yeah, of course you do. Because there's something extraordinarily attractive that taps into your dark side. Even if it's got a dark ending, you don't care. I remember seeing that film in the cinema, and every male walking out, strutting out of the cinema, thinking, "Can I grease my hair back?" Like, it's James Bond. Every boy wants to be James Bond. As young girls a few years ago always wanted to be Hannah Montana. Their journey taps into your deepest desires, and that seems to me really important. The ubiquity of the Cinderella story, the ubiquity of the ugly duckling story, is entirely built on, we all think deep down we're pretty useless and everyone's laughing at us and we're a bit crap, but if only I could prove, you'd see, that story is so seductive. So you get that a lot. And I think, you only want to go on a walk if you're comfortable with the person taking you for a walk and the journey in sight is somewhere that feels appealing. And that doesn't have to be a nice story. It can be the darkest tales of revenge, because, of course, we all feel those things too. They're all laughing at me. I'm going to kill them. This may just be me, obviously.
No, I'm a screenwriter. I know how that feels.
Yeah. So it's that. So there are certain types of story that you shouldn't be formulaic about it, but Jack Reacher is a wandering knight errant who brings justice to forlorn communities, just like David Carradine did in Kung Fu 40 years ago. And when I was a kid, David Carradine in Kung Fu was the coolest thing on the planet.
It's interesting on Michael Corleone thing as well, because you often get notes, from producers say, "Oh, I want these characters to be more likable."
Oh, yeah.
And that's often a bum steer, isn't it? They don't need to be likable. They need to be intriguing. Really.
Yeah, it used to be like that all the time in telly, but that was because telly was, depended on mass audience, and so you try not to offend anybody. But since cable and streaming and video on demand has taken off, and since The Sopranos in particular, that's changed a lot. And there's a much greater understanding that you don't have to be nice. Nice is really boring. I mean, Russell T Davis's advice is just don't think about it at all. Just write. And I think in a sense he's right. If you love them, the audience will love them, and that's all you have to worry about.
Yeah.
That kind of epitomizes Bryan Cranston's character, Walter White, in Breaking Bad. We had Bryan on the show earlier, and it was that experience of falling in love with this character and then the character turning bad, and then being in this awful situation of thinking, I'm still kind of shouting for him, but I can't believe he just did that. Yeah. And it's that whole experience. I love that analogy that you just gave. I think it's so important for us to, as writers, almost to at some point stop, and if we're falling out of love with a character, what does that mean? Does that mean that we're actually no longer interested in the character, or we're losing touch with the character, or it's just that it's changing, but we're still actually in love with them underneath? It's brilliant. I mean, we're writing a female protagonist, which is a challenge because we're having to put ourselves into the mind of a woman, and it explains why Mark totters around the office now in high heels and a dress. But
yes, as he is now.
Well, quite exactly, just comfortable.
So how do you, when you're writing, I mean, you've obviously written characters of the opposite sex. How do you even start to approach that yourself when you have to try to get into their shoes, as it were?
Oh, it's such a big question. I mean, when I was been doing it, I just think of people I know and try and imagine what it's like to be them. I mean, that's, it's the process of empathy, isn't it? You try and imagine what it's like to be someone else. If you're good at that, then it works. I don't know what else you can say. It's really weird now because there's this whole thing of cultural appropriation where people say, well, you can't tell their story. You can't tell their story. You can't dress like that. I find it all slightly sad, really, because as humans, what makes a society is our ability to imagine what it's like to be someone else. That's what empathy is. And if you're saying, oh, no, we can't empathize with them, we can't go into that culture or that culture. If you're good, why can't you? Even if you're bad, you'll do it and no one will read it. But if you're good, then... So I think don't be daunted by that. There are plenty of wonderful books written by men about women, as there are amazing books written by women about men. It's just a question of observing and being attuned.
Absolutely.
Exposition is a minefield for writers. We've got a very light touch of science fiction in our book. If you think sort of Back to the Future, the first Back to the Future, kind of light, it's not much technobabble, but there are things there, rules essentially that need to be outlined and made clear. What are the best ways of conveying exposition in your story as efficiently as possible without boring and info dumping on the reader or the viewer?
Okay, well, in drama, there's a few sort of quick fixes. The easiest one is have an ingenue. Have someone in there who's like the reader, who doesn't know, and then someone's got a reason to tell them all that information. So every brand new drama series always starts with the rookie. The rookie's there to be told this stuff we need to know. So that's one way. The second way is really through conflict. If you need to get information across, have an argument. Because then exposition is weaponized. Exposition. The problem with exposition in real life is there's no real desire to say it that's inherently dramatic. But if you have an argument, then the exposition gets disguised. It's a desire. It has a desire attached to it. All writing is about desire. The protagonist always wants something. So if you give your exposition desire, for God's sake, give up smoking, then I know you smoke. Yeah. It's that, isn't it? And I think, the best people to do that, and it's also because I write video games occasionally as well, and you see this, they've learned hugely how to hide exposition, is you just reveal exposition through inference. As you go through the story, you work it out from what the characters are doing. But that's the more skilled version. I mean, I do in the book, I do a little history of exposition. It goes all the way back to the prologue in ancient Greece, who says, "Here is our scene, and they are at war with these people." And then you get to the 19th century, and the whole table dusting things where you get two maids come on and say, "You'll never guess what so and so has been up to." And film writing now is at its best. It's like exposition is all invisible, which is what you want. You don't want to know you're being given information.
Well, they put it all in the trailer these days.
Well, that helps. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I've got a quick question. Well, I say a quick question of the week. I think this could open a real can of worms here. But and I put word out earlier today. Has anyone got a question of the week for John? And then my daughter tweeted me. She didn't call me or speak to me. She tweeted me. That's the new generation, people.
Sign of the times.
And she says, I've got two. Can your story have too many characters? And how many characters should a story focus on? I mean, you have films that are ensemble pieces, and then you have very much those kind of hero's journey where it's about one person. But is there such a thing as too many characters?
Yes, of course there must be. I mean, it depends on what you're trying to achieve, because there's been so many great gang shows on television with, ER or The West Wing would have 6 protagonists. That works really well. It depends how you do it. You decide, is your show a multi-protagonist show? Is it a dual protagonist show like Starsky and Hutch, or is it a single protagonist show? And you work from there. I think if you get beyond 6, it gets quite hard for the audience to focus on who they're being involved with and why should they care. But a great writer can probably find a way to do more than 6 or 10. But it also depends on the length of the story, the duration of the story. But with 6, what you find is, you see even then structural patterns. It's all those 6 are different facets of one personality. So you have the brainy one, you have the impetuous one, you have the father figure, you have the rookie, and you put them all together and you've got one protagonist.
This rings very true. Have you come across this thing called the Band of 5? I'll find a link and I'll put it on our Facebook and on our Twitter. And I think it refers to a lot of Joss Whedon shows where he'll have 5 people. And it will be like, you'll have the lead singer, you have the guitarist, you have the drummer, and they all have different facets. Yeah. They all have a different role in the story, and you can switch between. And if you look at Firefly, if you look at Buffy, you can tick them off essentially, which is interesting.
I knew one guy who used to, always build his 4 main characters around the personalities of the Beatles.
Oh, brilliant.
Wasn't Joe Hill, was it? Yeah.
Joe, when we interviewed Joe, he says at some point in his book he brings in the Beatles, and in every interview the Beatles always eventually come into the discussion. So. It's brilliant.
Of course, if you're doing a soap opera, you've got a huge cast of characters there. But of course, each episode can only concentrate on so many characters. So is it a question of giving the writers a character or a family to focus on for that week? Is that how it works?
The episodes are storylined. Normally, the episodes are storylined, so the writer will know what's expected of them. They'll have it can be a paragraph, it can be a page, it can be 2 pages, and it'll have, depending on the show, it'll have, the EastEnders, when I ran it, was 5 storylines in each episode. So you'd have we had 2 A stories, which is a bit silly really. So we had 2 big stories, then we had a B story, a C story, and a tiny little D story. And that was the same every week. And we gave, this is the episode where Grant discovers that Sharon has been having sex with Phil or whatever. And you give them that and you say, well, here's where it starts, here's where it ends, go off and write it. And their job is to join the dots. Soap writing is it's just a real skill, is joining the dots. Outside of that, you used to go to the writers and say, we need a new family. We need to develop can you create a new family for us? And the best writers would then go off and do that. And that would give you something.
And do you have any tips on alternating and pacing the switches between those storylines? Because certainly in our book, we've got definitely a big, well, actually it is kind of a double A, isn't it? I mean, we had an A and a B, but actually the B is becoming its own A, isn't it? And we've got various little subplots running beneath. So I'm certainly finding that you reach a point where you think, I need to get out here. I need that thing of, asking a question, answering, and let's go to the other story. Is that a good jumping off point?
Yeah, I mean, I always remember it was Ian Banks, I think, and years ago I read The Crow Road and I thought, God, this is brilliant, because every single chapter I'm desperate to carry on, and he always went somewhere else, and I was really annoyed for about 30 seconds. I thought, yeah, this is really interesting. Wow, it's like a squirrel, and that's the trick, isn't it? Is it's really useful in deferring gratification. It's just, I'll go over there. I'll go over there. So you hold back the answer. You put someone in jeopardy, you cut away. You can formulate rules, but I think mostly people do it instinctively. At some point, go, okay, that's enough there. Let's leave him alone. I need to go over here, and then it's trial and error. What's interesting, if you do it like that, is in hindsight you'll look back and you'll find a pattern. Because I think what you're doing when you're writing is, as I said, you're chiseling away at marble to find the story that's in there. Yeah. So you just do it and you find it. If you look at the very first episode of ER, Michael Crichton's amazing script for ER, and there's 6 characters, it's 90 minutes long. And I stared at it for 2 years thinking, how's he done this? And then finally go, oh, I get it. And there is a really clear, really simple shape at its heart.
How do you study scripts? Do you sort of just sit down and make notes and pick them apart? Is there a method you use for doing that?
Well, when I started doing this, I really did go to the cinema with a pad of paper and a stopwatch. I could work it out. So I thought, I'm going to have to just time everything and explore it. I think it's like doctors and x-rays. If I look at an x-ray, it's just there. Yeah. But a doctor will look at it and go, oh yeah, there's a carcinoma of your lung. Yeah. And the more you do it, the more you know what to look for, and you start to be able to see stories very quickly. So it's very unusual for me now to see something and not be able to see its structure, pretty quickly. But, while you're watching it, you try really hard not to think about it, because that means it's not any good. It's a nice pleasure afterwards.
I do catch myself, if I'm watching a movie or even a TV show now and something significant happens, I glance down at the clock. Oh, yeah, 10 minutes in, right, yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. I think, it's like, it should be fun to and the structure bit comes afterwards, I think.
You were saying this, weren't you, Mr. Desvaux? This whole experiment has completely ruined movies for you.
Oh, completely. I mean, I'm completely ruined now, because I've come from the music world. I'm a songwriter and an artist in there, and I could never listen to a song again, just enjoy a song, because I'm thinking, it's a really interesting bass line. And it's become the same now. It's become the same with TV. But one of the things I'm also fascinated in, John, that you also mentioned earlier, you kind of alluded to it, is what I call the dumb 8. Have you come across the dumb 8 before?
No. Tell me.
So it's the moment where you have that massive cliffhanger, and then you have that dum 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 dum, right?
Right, yeah.
So
got it.
One of the crucial things that I've been really paying attention to in the book that we're writing is that every last line in that chapter has to be a cliffhanger, or has to grab people. Now, from having worked on all these series that you have, especially, I mean, again, we come back to EastEnders as the king of those shows. What have you learnt about the importance of getting that right? With EastEnders, people would, if they're into the show, they'll keep watching it. But it is crucial, isn't it, that cliffhanger, that last bit, is what brings people back or turns the page in the case of the book. Yeah,
it's a subversion of expectation, either of the audience or the protagonist at the last second. And that's brilliant. I mean, it goes back to, I sound really pretentious now, it's Greek drama, isn't it? I think the Greeks call it peripeteia and agnoresis, which is a reversal and discovery. So it's as old as that. It's a basic unit of dramatic structure. It's something is confronted by its opposite that flips what you thought you knew on its head at the last minute. And it's a brilliant device, because it's the crisis point of the scene, which means you go, oh no, don't leave them there, don't stop. That's what you want, isn't it? It's an extraordinarily powerful thing. I mean, people look in soaps, people tend to look at it as a slightly cheap and meretricious device, and it can be if it's used badly. It's like the 1960s Batman, like Batman was about to die, and the next week you'd realise that the whole thing was ridiculous, and obviously he was never at all. So you've got to pay it off cleverly in an intelligent way that's surprising yet somehow feels true. They're very hard to do.
I was going to say, is it a bit like, I think of you almost think of a team of people sitting around just working on getting that ending right. Was that the case when you'd work on these shows?
Well, yeah, and when you're planning something like EastEnders, you put a lot of work into that. But yeah, the really simple way of looking at it is you reverse engineer. What do I want to end? And then, okay, that's my ending. I'm going to write against that.
Brilliant.
And you just do it like that. So the master of that was actually Aaron Sorkin. There's that wonderful episode of The West Wing where someone's trying to assassinate the president's party, and you're in President Bartlett's limousine, and he's saying, I'm really worried. What about Zoe? I think Zoe's been shot. We've got to turn around. We've got to go and get her. And there's about 3 minutes of thinking, oh, what a great guy. He's really worried about his daughter and his staff. And then suddenly you realise he's been shot. And it's an amazing moment. Bang into the credits, and you're just there. And yeah, Aaron Sorkin does it all the time. He's a master craftsman. So,
do you think of that in terms of emotion as well? Do you ever think this is how I want people to feel by the end of the episode or by the end of the show? I want them to feel bereft or angry or sad or.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not often consciously articulated, but I think Tom Stoppard is really brilliant. He talks brilliantly about this. Is a writer's job is to organize information and release it in the right order to solicit the emotional response you require.
It's easier said than done.
It is, because a comedy will be exactly the same story as a tragedy, but the information will be released in a different order. And that's all it is really. It's working out when to release information for maximum desired effect. Because so much of writing is, I'm not going to tell them that yet. I'm not going to let them know he's her uncle. Because when I do reveal that at the end of the fourth act, it'll have this effect. It's always it's always variations on suspense or surprise, isn't it?
And I think it's certainly, again, when I started out, it's a rookie error in that you want to spill all that straight away.
Yeah.
You have this temptation to explain everything and maybe don't have the confidence to hold back the information.
New writers want to explain everything, and it's learning to withhold and intrigue, but also learning to lie to the audience. That's the real skill. Is the subtle way in which you lead an audience to infer a deep untruth, so then later on you can reveal it and they can go, oh, of course. That's why Agatha Christie is brilliant. The example I give in the book, I think, is I won't be able to remember this now. It's police there investigating a house fire. A mum and two children were badly injured. The woman had recently gone through a difficult divorce. So you immediately infer that it's the husband.
Right, yeah.
And of course the twist is it's either the mum who set fire to the house, or if you're really sick, it's one of the kids. And there you got instant story.
Yeah.
How about, John, when you've got in this idea sometimes that a character is, you're keeping a secret with the reader? Because there's all this idea of kind of holding everything back. And one of the struggles Mark and I have had is we've kind of had this discussion quite a bit. I've said, no, we want the reader to have the secret with us so they can say, no, don't go into the house type situation where you know what's going to happen. How do you tend to balance that? Because obviously you want to hold back things. You want to obviously have these surprises and twists. But how powerful is it when you kind of, you and the narrator and the reader are like an inside club in some ways, and the character doesn't know what's going on?
It depends on what emotional effects you want to have. I mean, Hitchcock always said that was far superior to surprise. He thought surprise was cheap, and even though he used it a lot. Psycho, it's quite surprising at times. But he always said, it's the bomb. He talks about, everyone knows this is the bomb under the table stuff. Is like if you tell the audience there's a bomb under the table, but don't tell the characters, you are glued. As they talk inanely about last week's football match, you're sitting there going, "Oh my God, there's a bomb under the table." So if that's the effect you want, then that's absolutely fine. I think Chekhov would not be Chekhov if Chekhov did that. Chekhov would talk about a football match, and you'd infer subtly their relationship over the ages from that conversation. That's the effect Chekhov wanted. So everybody's different. I think the more populist you are, the more surprise and suspense becomes really important, and not to be sniffed at. It's an amazing technique used in the right hands.
We'd like you to help us a minute, John, because we inferred about Joe Hill earlier, but actually before we do that, we want to talk about your book, Into the Woods. And it's obviously available on Amazon, and we think about half of our listenership have already gone out and bought it. But for the other 50%...
Don't get it confused with the James Corden musical, is what I'd say.
Yes, yeah. That would be a kind of a surprise.
To make.
So we've got a competition. You've kindly said that you would donate one of your books signed to give away. So if you're interested in getting a personalised copy of John's book, pop along to the bestsellerexperiment.com. It'll be under the Win tab in the navigation. And for anyone that entered a competition, we've had a number of competitions running. We had Joe Hill on the show. Absolutely interesting, fascinating guy. And he gave us a hard copy of his book, The Fireman. And it was a limited edition, Mark, wasn't it? Signed, a red edition, apparently. There's not many of those in the world.
Red edges on the paper, which makes it extra rare. And also signed by Joe. And also we have a Camp Wyndham T-shirt, which you just can't get anywhere. So it's one of the places featured in the book. So, this is quite a nice little package for a winner out there.
Absolutely. And we had hundreds of entries. And John, we're going to, through the magic of the internet here in Vancouver, across to London, I'm going to press a magic button and a name is going to appear on your screen, and we'd like you to read it out for us as the winner of that competition.
Do you want me to do the drum roll?
We've got to have the drum roll, absolutely.
We've done this 2 weeks on the trot now, so people are going to expect this. So, okay.
It's high quality. Here we go.
I've got to get the drum kit in the room first.
This is the suspense bit, John, that you were talking about, right? And the winner is...
Alison Sherwood.
Congratulations, Alison.
Well done.
That package will be winging its way to you. And if you didn't win, get over to the website and enter John's competition that's on the website this week, and we'll run for a short while. So, John, it's been... I want to ask a very cheeky question, actually. We're coming to the end of our first draft, aren't we, Mark? And
there's still about 20,000 words to go, you know? So
I'm being optimistic here. And what I'm going to do is, once we've got to the end of that draft, I'm going to stand back and just go through it and pick out, the major plot points, almost like line by line.
Sure. Very
high level. And we've asked a few of incredible, like Sarah Pinborough, who's fantastic. She's going to kind of like look at this and just tell us where the massive holes are. Sure. And I was wondering, with your amazing knowledge and the kind of bird's eye view, would you mind if I sent it to you and you could just literally give us a bit of a red line treatment on that?
Yeah, sure. I'd be delighted. As long as it's not, the length of the Encyclopedia Britannica, then... No,
absolutely not. We're going to get this down to a couple of pages.
I'd be delighted. Maximum. No, thank you for asking.
That'd be great. And then we can also apply everything that we've been learning in this show. I mean, I think we're going to come back to this, Mark, aren't we? In terms of, I've got so many notes here. I don't even know where to start.
Well, and also this is just really the tip of the iceberg. So, if you're interested in going deeper, which is what this is all about at the moment, John, you run a number of courses, and they're not just for writers either. I mean, there's courses for drama, but there's also courses for business people as well. Do you want to talk about those for a moment?
Well, I started off just looking at narrative in television, and then you realise that the rules of narrative have to be the same for everything, or they can't be true at all. The only difference between narrative in a book and narrative in a theatre is the mode of consumption. The story is fundamentally the same. So I started looking at it in other areas, partly because I was asked to, and then partly because I just, wow, this is fascinating. So we do storytelling for business. I spend a lot of time working with advertising agencies, honing their stories. We do storytelling for the novel. We do storytelling for video games. You start to realize after a while there are so many different applications of narrative. But business is, one of the most interesting is how a company tells its story.
They can find these courses on johnyorkstory.com, and some of them are web-based, so you don't have to even leave your home.
Yeah, most of them are, you do them in your own time at home, but we also provide a consultancy service, and we'll come and talk, and whatever people want, really. You're a sort of bespoke narrative consultancy.
And John, have you got any more plans in the pipeline for any more books on what we've been talking about today?
It's a horrible question. Yes, I've started the second book, which is about this in non-fiction, how narrative works outside of fiction.
I'll be the first reader of that book, because I'm a big fan of non-fiction as well.
Well, if you can wait 6 years, I think...
I'll tell you what, I'll be your beta reader. How about that?
That's perfect.
Send me your notes.
It's a fair swap.
Excellent.
And where can we find you online, John?
johnyorkstory.com.
If you want to get in touch with us, drop us a line over at bestsellerexperiment.com. We have our own little book, which is coming together. We transcribe all our interviews. So we've got story advice from the likes of John Yorke, from Sarah Pinborough, Joe Hill, Joe Abercrombie, Joanne Harris, Michael Connolly, and that's free. Just pop over to the bestsellerexperiment.com, sign up to our newsletter, and we can provide it as an EPUB or as a PDF. Come over and say hi on Facebook. We're at Bestseller Experiment. Twitter is at BestsellerXP. We've got lots of visual clues about our stories over on Pinterest, and we're on Instagram too.
And don't forget, for everyone who's found this interview fascinating, it's been one of the most educational for me. Get over to wherever you can find it, bookstores, Amazon, and buy John's book now, Into the Woods. It will change your life. And I've got to say, John, you know, when you look at Amazon and you look at the different comments that you've had, people dream of getting one of the papers like The Guardian or The Times to say something nice about the book. Proof is in the pudding for your book. When you look at that list of all of the writers and all of the journalists and what they say about your book, I honestly say this now, this book is and will be seen as a classic in years to come. And I think what you've actually given to the world as a legacy, I know you're a very humble guy, I can tell that, but what you've given to the world as a legacy will live for years and years to come. And I just want to thank you for that and your contribution to the arts, because I think it's an incredible piece of work that you've given. And your insight, the way that you see things, is for me what connects completely. All those years you've spent analysing, it's all paying off in huge ways for everyone. So thank you so much for everything you've given.
That's extremely kind of you. Thank you.
This is normally when I pull a face and make some kind of cynical comment, but I totally agree. I mean, this is yeah, I totally agree. This book is my Bible, basically. So, fantastic. And thank you so much for coming on the show. I know how incredibly busy you are. So
it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely brilliant. And thank you so much, John. And best of British luck in everything that you do from this moment on. And we look forward to seeing how your hero's journey develops as well.
Thank you very much.
So thank you so much, John. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And it's a goodbye from Mark 2. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book? Quitting the day job? Becoming a best-selling author? Since 2016, we've interviewed and studied the advice of over 500 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 1 billion books. And in the Bestseller Academy, we've incorporated powerful and proven strategies for success, inspiring fiction and non-fiction authors just like you to reach new heights and write their best book ever. Ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, coaching, and the most inspiring and exclusive community of like-minded writers? Well, your bestseller dreams are just a click away. Join us today at bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. Are you ready to transform your writing and your life? Join the 200-word challenge today. In just 5 days, learn to develop a lifelong writing habit with over 2 hours of free expert coaching and the encouragement of a vibrant community. This program has already changed the lives of thousands of writers like you. No matter how busy you are, this challenge will show you that with just 200 words a day, you can significantly boost your creativity, productivity, mental health, and confidence, propelling you towards the end. For the first time, receive comprehensive coaching and step-by-step guidance, all for free. Transform your writing habit and start your journey to become the writer you've always aspired to be. What are you waiting for? Sign up for free now at 200wordchallenge.com and make writing a part of your daily life for life.